Hey everyone, welcome back to the Art2Life podcast. Super excited you guys are here. Today's guest, I'm excited to share with you. Sometimes I find people, I know people, I've been tracking their work forever, and then sometimes I find things that just come across my feed and I notice them and then I kind of can't stop thinking about them. Then I go back and to learn more. And such was the case of figurative abstract artist Anna Kincaide. Her work, I just saw it. I don't know where I saw it, and it just stuck in my mind. And then I kept thinking about it. Then I couldn't remember her name, and then I went back, and then I learned more. And I just think it's pretty darn interesting what she's doing, the kind of work she's making, what she's talking about. And I invited her on the show, and this is the first chance I've had an opportunity to speak with her. But I know this is going to be an awesome conversation. Anna, thanks so much for joining us. And you're based in Florida, correct?
I am, yes, Tallahassee.
By the way, you guys listening, go to art2lifepodcast.com or go to art2life.com and click on podcasts, and you can scroll down and you can see some of Anna's work because it really relates to what we're talking about. But maybe just give us a quick little summary before we dive into your history and everything about what you're working on, and your study of women and the interior world of women and societal pressures. And it's just a really interesting conversation and an important one. And I just thought maybe we could start there, and then we'll go into the how this has affected your work.
I've studied the female form forever. I mean, like since a child, I was always interested in figurative work. Went through college. Everybody was like, you can't make any money being an artist. So I did interior design instead, which was great. And I learned, all of these wonderful design and art elements that are applicable in my work today. And then and around 2008, I was, the economy was shifting. I was working as a museum designer, got out of that field, and I thought, now is the time, to begin doing fine art if I'm going to. And so I just dove into the study of women. They're obviously a beautiful art form. They've been classically studied for years. And, when I started painting them, I really was not so much interested in like a facial identity. I wanted to keep their faces obscured. I wanted there to be an element of relatability for the viewer looking at the painting, that they don't see necessarily a portrait, but maybe a reflection of themselves or someone they know or something like that. And so I started working with these floral kind of headdresses, if you will, and they just kind of evolved into not really like a physical headdress as much as they're more an expression of the female psyche, of our mind, of our consciousness,
Yeah.
what's going on all of the time, kind of this explosion of everything that women are feeling and going through in this beautiful sort of chaotic form. It began to really resonate that way with myself, with viewers, and I just kind of ran with it, and it continues to evolve.
Yeah, I mean, as a male, I've had a lot of conversations around the inner world and how men think differently and how women
Mm-hmm.
think, and trying to grapple with that. And it was just really helpful for me to, like, I could so relate when I saw your pictures. And I think that's what drew me in, because I really got that without reading anything about the work. I mean, it's
Mm-hmm.
it's celebratory, it's beautiful, it's
Mm-hmm.
chaotic. It's all things all this at the same time in a way. And I'm not
Mm-hmm.
saying this in a disparaging way. It's a different way, and I see how there's challenges sometimes, different modes of thinking, like
Mm-hmm.
I have trouble. I do one thing at a time and I can't hold many things. And I notice, and I see this in my daughters too, and we talk about this a lot, how they can kind of hold many things. And your
Yes.
pictures do that. And,
Yeah. I
it
mean, I
was
think that's the role of
amazing.
females these days. I think, I mean, historically, we've always played many roles, but today more than ever. I mean, you have women that are at home with their children, women that are working on their careers, balancing this home work life at the same time in society where we're really making strides in our bodies professionally, all of these societal things that we're up against. And so I think women especially have this sort of insane narrative going on in their minds all the time. I know I do, most of my friends that,
Yeah.
we all do. And when I became a mother, it just kind of amplified. That was when, for me as a female, all of these different roles that you play kind of really came into, being for me. And the flowers and the female form and just everything that we embody, our resilience. I was listening to a podcast, interestingly, with Jeff Koons, and he was talking about in his early work, he studied flowers, and he was speaking to their resilience. You can pour concrete over them, you can lay all this stuff on top of them, and they find a way. They still grow, they still bloom. And I
Yeah.
feel that females are also really representative of that, as, again, especially today in society, just continuing to push, continuing to fight, continuing to grow and expand and be resilient and beautiful and strong. And that all of the chaos and the strength that we embody, it's this really beautiful thing too. So, I want the flowers to be this exciting, celebratory, like you said, really beautiful celebration of women and all of the things that we're thinking and going through. And it's just
Yeah.
cool to see it evolve, and see people pick up on that. And, sometimes you have an idea in your mind, and then whether the viewer is going to catch that or not, you never know. And so that's exciting to see that it does seem to resonate with people.
Yes, yes. And that's what was it was just a home run when I read about what you were communicating. I mean, that's pretty amazing, right? That you take something that's pretty abstracted. What you're making isn't isn't really anything that's existed before. I mean, these are kind of headdresses, but not really, and so
Hmm.
it was kind of amazing to me that I got it, and it made so much sense. Now, you're using, is it collaged in, like, there's a vintage aspect to the women that you're
Yes.
using. You're collaging them in, so there's a kind of that Cary Grant era.
Hmm.
Why that? And that's just sort of interesting to me.
It's funny. Actually, my early work, before I was even working with flowers, I was just obsessed with this vintage era. So it's funny that still kind of comes through in my work, even though I'm not studying it as much as I did. But yeah, the collage work came. I like back in January, I guess January of last year. I just kind of hit this wall creatively, professionally, emotionally, mentally, all of that. I just kind of hit my point, and I was like, I need a minute. I need to go back to the drawing board, pun intended. And so it took some time in the studio. And before that, I had not done any collage work. I'd done no mixed media. I'd used acrylic from time to time on like an underpainting. And so I started working with paper, which I've always loved to do. And ironically, it started with the flowers. I had like taken a beat from the studio, and I was kind of burnt out. And finally I felt really ready to go back and paint. And I was like, okay, let's do this. And I drove to the studio, and I was, how it feels. You're just itching to create. And I walked in, and about 20 minutes after I got here, my power went out. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. So I waited, nothing happened. I leave to go back to my house. I'm super frustrated. And I see that there's a live oak in the road. So I'm like, okay, power's going to be out for like the day. I mean, it's this massive tree. And so I went home, and I've been watching that Andy Warhol documentary that was out on Netflix last year sometime. And I was still like, oh, I need to paint. I need to paint. It had been a minute. And so I got out my son's like Crayola markers and his construction paper, and I'm listening to Andy Warhol. It's raining outside, and I start line drawing these florals. Um, and I wasn't going to do anything with them. It was more just kind of like a gestural exercise to kind
Mm-hmm.
of get me back in the groove. But I looked at them and I was like, I like these. And so then I started cutting them out and I was like, I'm gonna bring them back to the studio. I don't know what I'm gonna do with them, but like they look pretty cool. So I got back the next day and I started pasting them into the floral painted portion. And it was like from there, I just hit the ground running and I started working with all of these collage elements, these vintage papers that I found. And so they're still largely oil paintings, but there's this very layered mixed media process that goes into them as well, which again, I feel really resonates with the female, these layers that, or
Yeah.
humans in general, not even just females, but these layers that we have to ourselves that I found that really, really interesting. And it's the paper, ironically, is very challenging to work with. It kind of has a life of its own, which I'm learning to roll with. Cause again, that's part of life. You can't predict everything. And I'm sort of allowing those elements to show through in my work, these more human aspects of it, marks that I didn't necessarily mean to make. Oh, the paper crinkled here where I didn't intend it to, because this is the fabric of all of us, I mean, we're
Yeah.
all a collection of these intentional and unintentional kind of experiences and things we do. And so the work is really embodying all of that.
You talked a few minutes ago about you kind of hit a wall.
Yes.
Take us into that. What's because the challenge and the breakdown is what catalyzes the amazing work. And I'm just curious the
Mm-hmm.
connection between what you were struggling or pushing against or feeling the confinement of. What was it?
Um, well, really it had sort of become professional pressure. When you start out as an artist, you're like, oh my God, if I could just sell enough paintings to like keep painting and sustain myself. And so early on in my career, you push for exposure and then your goal is shows. And I had this very kind of calculated um, way of approaching my work professionally. And then all of a sudden, I've been doing it about a decade and I found myself doing like solo show after solo show after solo show. And it
Is it
became
was it
about,
was it the same kind of work that is it the
yes,
same
it
kind of work you're
was.
doing
It
now?
was,
Okay,
yeah, it's the
interesting.
same work. They were very large scale figures. So they were more portraits kind of like from here up. It was very much more kind of like a classical portrait pose. And it was still the florals, but they looked pretty different. I mean, there's kind of a marked point of where I was doing that. And then I progressed into this kind of new direction. But, I found myself on all of these deadlines and I cringe to think of using the word churn as you're speaking about your paintings, but that's how it felt. It felt like I was in here just grinding and working and I didn't have time to kind of sit back and think creatively. The work had kind of taken a life of its own and I had signed on to doing all of these things and then it was sales and that kind of thing. And then I had this big show and it kind of didn't go the way that I expected. And then it was like between that and all of the sort of professional pressure, I just absolutely hit a wall. I mean, like meltdown.
Oh,
I didn't want to paint anymore. I didn't want to do shows. It was the first time this had ever really happened to me. And it was really upsetting because I was like, my God, am I going to recover from this? Like, am I going to keep painting? Am I
yeah.
going to, I didn't even
Was
know what
it
to do. It's like I just lost my bearings entirely.
was it when you say that show didn't turn out, was it that the response wasn't good and you didn't
The
sell anything,
response was
or what was
slower.
different about it?
It was the sales were slower than usual. The response was slower than usual. I had found myself kind of personally really dissecting the work more than I would have. And as an artist, when you do these large shows, it's a huge undertaking. mentally, financially, emotionally,
Yeah.
all of that. You dedicate months to creating this body of work,
Yeah.
and then you put it out there and you're so vulnerable. And then, like, when you hear crickets, you're like, oh shit,
Oh,
I mean, and it just, for whatever reason, it was like the straw. You know what I mean? I was probably leading up to this kind of a meltdown anyway, and that was just icing on the cake. And so after
yeah.
that, I just, I, I mean, it was the first time I really was like, what am I doing? Who am I? What kind of art
Yeah.
am I creating?
Yeah.
Oh my God, how am I gonna do this professionally? Where do I go from here? I mean, it was the most challenging time professionally. And it lasted like 9 months or more, and
Yeah.
I needed to take time
Wow.
away from the studio. And then when I got back, and I told my galleries, and I said, I just really need some time. And they were wonderful. They understood. I think it's part of the process of being an artist. You have these times where you just have to kind of go back and collect yourself again and try new
Yeah.
things. And my husband was, but encouraging me, go back, just paint, don't worry about galleries, don't, try to get out of your head. And in doing so, little by little, this void that I was kind of experiencing sort of healed itself. And I started creating this new work. And again, this narrative was furthering itself. And this experience even added to it for me,
Yeah.
just
I think,
another flower on the stem,
yeah. Yeah. And it's happened to me, is that you have experienced some success or something that your show. And I mean, this happened to me, and I had, oh my God, I had a really good show and people loved my
Hmm.
work and we sold most of it. And
Hmm.
it was a win. And
Yeah.
then you sign up to do another one. And because of the confidence that you gained and because of you have now an image of what your expectation is, it
Yes.
allows you to start doing stuff that it's like, well, yeah, but I really want that outcome again. So
Hmm.
I'm going to do extra, or I am going to do, we always have to like up the
It's like
game.
an
And so
adrenaline rush. I mean, you're like
yeah,
a
yeah,
junkie, you need
totally.
more. And what's funny to me too is that in the pursuit of art, you begin this career, you're creative, you have a passion for creating something. And what drove me in the beginning was the desire for that. And then somewhere along the way, and I feel like it's contorted this way in every profession, all of a sudden the worth that I felt for myself and my art was based on the money that I made, the sales, the success of the shows, and that I
Yeah.
had let that begin to dictate who I was creatively and who I was as an artist. And that was the day, along with this whole sort of breakdown that I had, where I was like, this can't be, this can't be it, because you realize also sort of the false sense of security you have in
Yeah.
valuing your work based on your
Yeah.
sales. And then the irony is that you need to have the sales to do the work. I mean, so it's difficult to try to keep all of that in perspective, but it was a wonderful sort of like knock me over the head reminder that the work that you're doing is beyond the money that you're making, beyond the success of your shows. Your narrative and your motivation comes from something deeper than what society has sort of made it about, which is measuring success based on sellout shows and all of these kinds of things. And I think artists get caught up in that as much as anybody else does.
Yes, yes. And when we finally take a breath, or we let go, or we're
Hmm.
forced to let go, and we didn't
Hmm.
get what we wanted, and we've overextended, we're not even doing maybe the work that we really should be doing. Maybe we've compromised it, or just we're just
Yep.
trying for the same outcome. Once
Yeah.
that thing doesn't happen, you realize how like, oh my God, I'm completely out on this branch that doesn't
Right.
fit me,
Right.
you know?
Yes.
And
Yes.
and and so
100%.
then you just have to like, fall out of the tree on the ground. But then literally in the groundedness of yourself,
Hmm.
then it's like, oh my God, it's not about all these externalities. It's an
Hmm.
internal kind of uh, groundedness, embodiment that
Hmm.
makes that I can do this sustainably. And what I love about this is that actually that is the business plan. That is probably where
Right.
the amazing work is going to come from anyway. So you're going to get the
It
sellout
is.
shows or
Yeah.
whatever, but you got to
Right.
go down
Right.
there first.
Oh, I know. And nobody wants to go down there, but it is a wonderful learning lesson. And it was a catalyst for this, a real evolution in my work, in my narrative. While I was exploring a lot of my art, I was exploring a lot of myself also, my own internal motivations, as a mother, as a wife, as a creator, as a friend, as a female, in society, and what all this means, and how to balance it all. And so sort of hitting that rock bottom um was necessary. Maybe, I don't know that
Mm,
I would have even, because it's like that butterfly effect. You trace it back. Had I not had that moment, I wouldn't have taken this time off. I wouldn't have come in on that random day with the power out, gone home and drawn those flowers. When you look at the way that everything is interconnected, and how all of these seemingly really painful experiences can lead to something really intensely beautiful or creative, or just opens your own mind to the fragility of things, and how we're all kind of balancing on this tightrope. And so it was an interesting time for me, and had that not occurred, without a doubt, I wouldn't be doing the work I'm doing now and
yeah.
exploring, this narrative in a more intense way, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's just amazing, isn't it, when to
Hmm.
kind of look back. This whole thing is rigged for you to win.
I
I mean, when
know.
you really
Yeah.
pull
Yeah.
back and look at
It's
it,
true.
when you're describing and as a woman artist and as a woman and from a male's perspective, me looking over there, what I'm learning or trying to get more competent at is this thing about capacity of sensitivity, about holding, I don't even know how to describe it. It's like an open-heartedness,
Hmm.
uh, a sensitivity to what is actually happening. When I say it's difficult to hold it all and to pay attention to all the things, and I tend to, if I'm gonna work, I'm gonna work, and I completely
Hmm.
disconnect from parts of myself. But what I've experienced, women and my girlfriend talks about this a lot. It's like an ability to hold actually what's happening. I mean, I feel like for me as a man, I am as a male, I am missing, I am not actually connecting to everything that's actually happening. Does that make
Hmm.
sense? And so
Yes. Yeah.
your work feels like that to me, and the difficult, the beautiful, but it takes a kind of a willingness to open yourself that is hard in a way, at
Yeah.
least for me. And
Yeah.
so as a woman artist, and with all you're going through, when you talk about, as a mother, as as an artist, as you know doing a job, having a
Hmm.
business and everything. How is that, do you think, different than the sort of path that male artists get to go down? And I'm pretty aware of our position in society, and
Hmm.
I understand the privileges and all of that, and it's all skewed and it's all out of whack. But
Right.
how does that contribute? How do you feel that those two worlds kind of collide, and how you butt up against that?
You know, to be honest, I think it's a really fantastic time to be a female artist.
Yeah.
It is it is skewed historically in favor of male artists, and it's but I feel that that is really shifting. And I'm so thrilled to be creating art as a female that's about females, a celebration of females during this time. And I think because of the awareness that's happening in society right now, women artists are garnering more attention, I think, than they ever have. And so, it's hard to say how is it in comparison to male counterparts. I'm not really sure. Things have, you know, gone well, and but I think it's exciting to be part of all of these females that are really putting their art out there and they're being recognized. And I
Yeah.
see female artists everywhere, and it's just incredible. And if this podcast inspires one more female artist,
Yeah.
to get out there and keep going, um, because there's a world of possibilities right now. I mean, I think it's a really exciting time to be a female. I mean, there's probably people that would disagree with me there, but there are doors opening for us that haven't existed before, and we're kind of
Yeah.
kicking them down
Yeah.
and making our own path and creating our own narratives and telling our stories, which I think is incredible.
I think the feminine way of being, the thinking, the ultra sensitivity,
Hmm.
that is, we need that, and
Hmm.
men
Yes,
need to
very
learn
much.
that. Like,
Yeah.
this is the way forward. I mean, I don't think
Right.
it's just like, okay,
Right.
finally, let's pull a chair up and everyone gets to have a contribute to the table. I
Right.
think that what women have to teach us is the way
Hmm.
forward right now.
Hmm.
And men have to get more sensitive and have a
Hmm.
greater capacity to hold more, to have bigger conversations, and to
Hmm.
to experience, respond properly to all that's
Hmm.
happening, all the challenges that we're going through. And so
Yes.
I just think that's that's where I see the value here. So
Right.
you
Well,
know,
and I think too, what I was saying earlier about the resilience of a flower, I think that's, between a female and a male perspective, you look at a flower, it's delicate, it's beautiful, but like I said, resilient as hell. I pass by this red daisy on my walks through my neighborhood, and I have a picture of it on my phone because it dies and comes back every spring. And every spring it is more vibrant, it's bigger, it's got a little friend next to it now, and so in terms of the florals, you don't necessarily look at a flower and think of it as something that is strong, but it is, and it is resilient. It does continue to grow. And I think that sort of is the embodiment of female strength, maybe unassumingly so. And I love that the florals kind of
yeah.
represent that. It's a softer kind of strength, which I think that we all innately possess.
Yes, and I feel like you're almost using it's sort of a cliche, but
Yeah.
because you are doing it, like when I say a cliche, it's like, oh, butterflies and
Yeah.
hummingbirds and flowers, and this
Sure.
is, it's like, like stickers you would get for in a
Hmm.
for like a little girl's bedroom, but you're
Right.
elevating it and embracing it and saying
Hmm.
yes, yes,
Hmm.
that, and also this as well, and
Hmm.
it just, so I think
Well,
it's,
I mean, and women are the source of life, I
yeah,
mean, if you look at this large floral and then the women are the base of that, I mean, we're the source of every living being, human on this planet. And that's pretty
right.
remarkable. And to think of that in this organic floral very naturistic kind of way. I love that idea as well, that the women are kind of the root of this beautiful growth that we're seeing.
And you have in your work always angular, there's these bars, these structural
Mm-hmm.
components that kind of offset. It's a juxtaposition, which I got
Mm-hmm.
right away. But could you just, so is that the societal confinement
Yeah.
symbolism, or just
Yeah.
something to ground it, you
I
know?
think so. You know,
Okay.
when I started working with the stripes initially, and then the paper as well, it struck me as I was kind of going through this own, kind of emotional roller coaster on my own that we discussed, how sort of controlled and calculated and rigid these angular elements of these paintings were. And then it was funny because I would get to the floral piece, which is always the very last part that I paint, and it's like, whoo, you just kind of let loose. And I was like, this again also is very symbolic. I think women are so controlled in so many ways, in the way that we present ourselves,
Mm,
and that you're supposed to
yeah.
be this kind of mother, this kind of professional, this kind of wife. You're supposed to be ageless. You're supposed to be perfect. And these are these confines that are just really unattainable. And so you're moving through this very structured kind of society that we found ourselves in, and then the floral, a very organic part, was kind of breaking free, which I feel we're really making strides in that way. And then you had this female that was sort of at the vortex of all of this. There was the figure, and then the stripes and these very controlled elements that took a lot of to even create them. It was very slow and methodical,
Uh-huh.
and then you have this very free flowing kind of organic aspect as well. And then
Right.
you're just stuck in the middle, which is
Yeah,
again,
there's a
a very
yeah.
familiar female narrative. You're kind of caught between these two worlds, and how do you struggle the balance of all of them while also staying true to yourself? It's I think that's something that we all are working on.
Yes, it's sort of revealing the predicament, and
Yeah.
and it reminds me they have like a statuesque, it's like Athena,
Hmm.
when it's just, you
Hmm.
just put it in the middle, it's this amazing sculpture, this figure. um it's powerful,
Hmm.
and when your work, when I look through it, is you are obviously on a theme here, and your work is, it's so interesting because I work with a lot of artists and style and everything. And there's something about limiting what you do that allows you to go deeper. I mean,
I totally
these
agree.
pictures, it's always a female. They're always in the
Hmm.
center. They're always have a sort of like explosive
Hmm.
floral explosion, beautiful headdress kind of quality and the structure, but they're all profoundly different. Can you just speak to how you use this sort of sameness to go deeper? Because I mean, I really got into looking at how, like, I kept thinking, well, God, she's doing the same thing here. And it's like, well, not quite,
Right.
not
Right.
quite. And it allows, and I never, I get why gallerists love this. And it's sort of a natural part of going deeper, that at first blush, it looks like you're doing the same thing. But can you talk about how you're going deeper with this, and how the process of doing, do you do three at once? Do you do 10? Do you nine? How do you're going deeper clearly, with these?
Well, at first, there's like pre nervous breakdown, post nervous breakdown. Before, I was working on a lot at a time. So I would do, like if I was doing 10 paintings, I would do 10 women, so I was working kind of in this same groove of like doing the figurative work, and then I would work on all of the backgrounds, and then I would work on all of the florals. And it wasn't as interesting to me because I realized that, again, I was working to hit all these deadlines, and
Yeah.
finish as many as possible and that kind of thing. And then when I came back to the studio after that and I was reevaluating what I was doing, I began working on them one at a time, like start to finish. And that has really change them
Yeah.
individually. And I find that I really am engrossed in each piece while I'm working on it. And it is
Hmm.
incredible amount of like problem solving and balancing and scale. You have this idea that you're communicating, but then with my design background, you still are applying all of these things to create this visual aesthetic that is pleasing as well as it is important. And so I
Yes.
found now that focusing on one at a time really allows me to dive into the mood of the painting, the mood of the female, really, and then get into the brushwork and all of these little tiny artsy little things, mark making. And, there was an element in my past work of like perfection that I was really striving for. If there was like a fingerprint or a mark or a line, it really stressed me out. And I would go back and I would try to cover them up. And so that everything, which again, kind of goes back to the way that I think women in particular feel this pressure to present themselves in a certain way. And I certainly did in my work. And with these newer pieces, I'm really trying to embrace letting the art be the art and let all of the marks that I make, whether it's like a thumbprint from moving it or a pencil mark so that I can get straight lines, or the underpainting of where I marked out the flowers, leaving all of these elements in the
Yeah.
painting, because every one of these marks makes up this whole, makes up
Yeah.
this piece that I've created, and that it may not be perfect, but that makes it beautiful, and that is more real to me than creating this piece with this perfectly executed background or covering up all of these little marks that I use to kind of guide myself while I was working, but to allow all of that to shine as much as the rest of it has been a really fun, a little nerve wracking. There are times that I'm like, oh man, but it's an evolution for me as well. But it's part of my process of learning to allow my paintings to communicate in a way that doesn't have to be perfect, and that I am an
Yes.
artist and I am human. And yes, that is a mark or a drip or something unintentional, but those unintentional pieces are as important as the intentional pieces. And so I find that being able to work on them one at a time allows them to really kind of blossom again,
Yeah.
no
Yeah.
pun intended.
It's so interesting because I can imagine the assembly line approach, right? Because you've
Yeah,
got a
yeah.
certain, I can imagine, like, I can
Uh-huh.
see how, well, I'm just going to get all the flower things and get all the
Sure.
collages done today, and I'm going to
Yeah.
work on 10. I got the glue out anyway. And, but that's what was so interesting because I think when I look at the work, it feels like you're really gaining territory on each of them. And so that's how I was so
Yeah.
curious, like how you're making it. It makes perfect sense to me that you're going in one at a time.
Yeah.
I mean, you have a
Yeah.
process. That's
Yeah.
not the problem, but just going in and responding as
Hmm.
you. And this idea of showing a bit more of yourself, all the
Hmm.
blemishes, it makes
Yeah.
perfect sense to
Yeah.
the
Well, it's
story
been
you're telling and the
liberating, you
yeah.
know? It's like
Yeah.
it does. It fits in this narrative of everything I'm trying to communicate and the struggles that I find I deal with on my own. And so it's been a really wonderful way, very cathartic to kind of work in this process. It means more that way. I mean, going up to famous paintings in museums, and you're like, look at that brushstroke. Van Gogh left that there. And I love being able to see those marks that artists leave behind that aren't even necessarily part of the main subject or whatever. That so it's been a great learning lesson for me to loosen up, because I am human, and there are
Yeah.
parts that I don't necessarily intend, but learning to live with them, and the same goes for my art. And so it's been quite an evolution.
Yeah, and it is something that you get to risk more as you
Yeah.
go, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember for me, my works, and who knows, it might change, but it's gone from a more controlled kind of
Hmm.
place. And I remember noticing, it was always on the bottom edges or the
Oh
sides, the
yeah. Yeah.
edges of
Yeah.
things, where I would
Yes,
look
for
at this
sure.
work, I'd have the show and I'd go and it's like I'm kind of sick of the work already when I go. But the parts
Yes.
that I
Yes.
wasn't sick of were the places on the edges or the bottom.
Yeah.
Like I'm looking down there like, God, I didn't spend hardly any time on that part down there.
Hmm.
And it's pretty good. Like that's
Yeah.
even better than most of all this intention. So
Hmm.
learning to like
Yes.
value all of you, and especially these more process marks or random marks where you're not
Hmm.
trying to white knuckle it so much. It
Right.
adds
I
huge
took
amount.
it does. It really does. I took a course with Milt Kobayashi several years ago, and it was like completely life altering, and he was wonderful, but he was talking about the instinct to painting and how often your best marks are your fastest and your first. That because you're really working with instinct and you're working more gesturally, and like you said, the edges of the paintings where you're not spending so much
Yeah.
time dissecting everything, um and you're letting the paint be paint and the painting be a painting. And it's when you start getting in there and really over analyzing what you're doing, and it becomes abstract. You're like, well, this doesn't look like a hand anymore. I mean, at a point your vision plays tricks on you. But yeah, the pieces, the parts that you don't spend as much time laboring over are often, in my opinion, the most beautiful. They're gestural, they're free. Yes, I can relate.
Yeah,
I can
yeah,
relate to that.
yeah. It's the impromptu
Hmm.
emotional conversation you might have that's challenging or difficult, or standing up and speaking something to a group when it's not planned. It can be incredibly moving and so
Hmm.
revealing of
Hmm.
who you are. And yeah, so it's that again, this ability to hold intuition and let that inner world out is very feminine
Hmm.
and so needed. I sometimes think, we're talking, you and I are having this conversation, and there's certain things that are happening in the moment, you know, uh, Chat GPT, or like all the war in Ukraine, the like everything that's
Hmm.
going on, Trump, and all the Me Too movement, and all the things that are swirling around. And do you ever think that you are here, you're the solution, or you're just part of this swirling, this is why you're making this work, what's happening now, you're just like part of this bigger universal wave, you're a solution
Hmm.
to some of this, and that
Hmm.
yes, these people come along, and they come along because of what's happening historically. It makes perfect
Hmm.
sense that
Hmm.
this is happening now. Do you think of yourself sometimes in that larger context, like, well, it makes sense, that
Yes,
maybe I
I
could look
do.
at it myself, like I'm here to
Yeah.
help people envision possibility for themselves. I mean, that's how I think of
Yes.
my teaching. I mean, whether they make art or not, it's like there is more for you here. You can
Yes.
step more into who you are. I mean, your
Hmm.
story is inspiring and moving to me, but that's my purpose in my life. I mean, I make art, but I'm also really engaged in doing this with others, so we can
Hmm.
change and evolve and grow.
Right.
And it makes sense because the confinements and the shutdown is kind of big right now.
Yeah. Yes, it is. Well, and being an artist is so solitary. I mean, back long ago, artists, I love what you do. I love that you're connecting all of these artists. I'm so excited to be able to speak with you today about it. But, it is a solitary kind of endeavor. And, we have things like the internet, and you can take courses and stuff that connect us, which is really wonderful. Um, but yes, I have thought recently, I was speaking with my dad about it the other day, and I was like, I can't really explain it, but I feel like I'm painting exactly what I'm supposed to be painting at the time that I'm supposed to be
Mm,
painting it.
that's it.
And
That's it. Yes.
and it's a really incredible feeling, and to create this narrative and to be able to connect with people over it at this point in history is really profound,
Yeah.
and it's exciting, and I am excited to see where the work evolves, because again, it's not something that I can predict, and it kind of takes on a life of its own. But it's hard, but sometimes you do lose sight of being part of this kind of collective movement, because again, you're in your studio often and you're just creating, and then the galleries or whomever gets the work, and that's separated from the artist a bit, remembering and thinking about society and the things that we're going through and why I'm
Yeah.
creating the work that I'm creating. And it does feel almost like I was just plucked here to do this exact thing right now. And so
Yeah. Yeah.
it's an exciting experience.
We're talking about purpose, and
Yeah.
I call it a tailwind, the kind of
Yeah.
momentum that you gain. And this
Hmm.
is, this is the subject for many podcasts, but
Hmm.
I just want to underline this for all of us, listeners, everyone, you guys, when you get when it's congruent with who you are and who you're becoming, and you're just a perfect example of this, and it feels like it's just so, it just feels right, the whole
Hmm.
thing, the conversation, the work, the momentum, the breakdown, like
Hmm.
it all feels
Yeah, it does.
like
It felt like it
makes
was all
sense.
really
Yeah.
necessary. Yeah. And even my own um struggles over the last year to year and a half felt really necessary for me to sort of continue my narrative and have it relate to me in this very real way, and that you're connected to your work and the reasons that you're
Mm.
painting, why you're painting, and why your technique is your technique. It's all very necessary. And when you kind of step back and look at this whirlwind and all of these things that had to happen to kind of put you where you are, you just feel gratitude, for having gone through it and having experienced it, and then being able to walk away and learn something and apply it in this new way. And I feel so fortunate to be an artist, because I think we're so lucky that we have this,
Yes.
avenue to express ourselves, whether it's artists or musicians or painters or something. My husband and I were watching, there's a documentary on David Bowie on one of the streaming channels the other day. And the consummate artist. I mean, just
Yeah.
wildly creative, such a personality. But I left and I was thinking about music and art. And I thought all of the things that are beautiful that people enjoy are made by someone creative, whether it's your car or your boat or your furniture or your painting or your landscape design, or
Yeah.
you know
Yeah.
how how very essential creators are in the enjoyment and prosperity and beauty of life, and so I feel really lucky to be able to express myself in this way. And as artists, I think it's a really wonderful thing that we are afforded to do.
Yes, yes, no, absolutely. It's this process that we're involved in, that we're changing things. We're taking things,
Hmm.
and I mean, what you're doing is you're taking elements and you're putting them together in ways that haven't been put together. I mean, that's what creativity is, right? It's the compilation of things put together in new and different
Hmm.
ways that allow other
Hmm.
people to see
Yeah.
what they would normally not see,
Right.
or to see and learn what exists,
Hmm.
what has existed all along. I mean, what
Right.
you're daylighting,
Right.
and now we can
And it's
understand
terrifying,
better. And it's
you know,
terrifying.
to
And
put it
you
out
changed
there.
in the
It's
process.
terrifying.
And we look at it and we change. And
Hmm.
yeah, so it's this sort of practice, this moving, stream that artifacts are created along the way that yes,
Yeah.
it enriches all of us and offers possibilities for where we're going and how to see the world. And it's powerful,
Hmm.
so
It
powerful.
is. It is. And art is always such a reflection of society and things that, are going on at the time. Again, and I don't mean just visual artists, music, movies, um, all of that. And so it is, it definitely is a wonderful way of reflecting society and relaying the human experience
Yeah.
and trying to find a piece of yourself, at the same time and share that with others, which is exciting as well. And again, nerve wracking because it's
Yeah.
terrifying to create something and then
Yeah.
throw it out there and talk about it and see what, the reaction will be. But it's just part
Yeah.
of part of the calling, part of the process.
And and I think, I've gone through the breakdowns, and I know
Hmm.
more are coming, by the way.
I know. I
More of
know.
them are coming because, what is that saying? New level, new devil, right? Like
Yeah.
each new foothold, there's a
Hmm.
new challenge, and so there's
Always.
more coming. But I was just for all of us. I mean, you're on a good patch right now, and the whole thing is reliant upon humility and staying true to yourself and not letting the gremlins of society or how other people perceive your work, and
Hmm.
to sort of avoid this sort of going out into an area that is not for you, and just staying
Right.
more sustainably grounded. What are some of the things you do, or how do you kind of think about it? Because I think this is a challenge we all struggle with. And I know, I'm like, what do you tell yourself? How do you muster up the courage, or the daily momentum? How do you keep that?
The daily momentum, like to paint, you mean,
Yeah,
or
yeah, and just to show up and to share and push yourself into more vulnerable and revealing
you know,
places.
I think it's a compulsion for me more than it's a decision. Like
Mm,
it's so instinctual. Like I remember once I started painting, I like never had a choice to do anything else. And so I think part of my continuing to show up and continuing to work and trying to evolve is just this instinct I have to push myself. Like my work evolves relatively quickly. It's like stays the same for like 6 months and then I'm on to something else. And so maybe that's just boredom or whatever. But in terms of staying grounded, um, I think the solitude helps. I live in a small town, and I'm so I'm by myself most of the time every day. And I think a lot what I'm going through or how I'm feeling and just trying to push the boundaries of my narrative and of my style and trying to introduce new elements and it's just constantly in motion and constantly evolving because the second I become bored with my work, it's over. You know what I mean? And so
hmm
most of the time, I feel like it's me trying to kind of one up myself to stay engaged, stay entertained, researching images and articles and staying relevant and those kinds of things. And it keeps me moving forward for my own sake, my own interest in my work. And I think that is why it's always evolving. It's always a little bit different. I will do something for a little while and then I'm like over it and wanting to try something else and push the subject matter further. And like you said earlier, studying females and florals, while it is the same subject, it really does allow for a lot of depth of exploration because women, I'll just leave it there, where we are an endless and wonderful and powerful, source of inspiration, florals, nature, that, constantly evolving. And
Yeah.
so I think that's, all of that kind of contributes to me every day. And I make a habit. I mean, it's every day I get up and I'm in the studio and I'm working, and I feel a little off if I'm not doing that, So that helps.
Yeah. I mean, I love that answer. The answer is the work. The
Yeah.
work is
Yeah.
keeps you doing the work, that it
Yeah.
fuels you. And I
Yes.
totally get that.
Well, and I
Um,
think the second I began creating for myself and not somebody else, that really shifted my perspective as well, to come in and create because these are the paintings I want to create. This is the story that I want to tell, and to let all of the shows, the galleries, the collectors, the comments, criticism, let that fall, because it's easy for that to creep in and for that to
yeah,
dictate the way that
yeah.
what will people think of this painting? What will they, and the second that starts happening, for me, I've lost it, and so I find that finding what motivates me and keeps me engaged helps me to continue, my evolution.
Well, yeah. So listen, I just want to thank you. It's a beautiful place to end. Just thank you for the work you make and just your resilience, and it's really beautiful and so inspiring for me, and I know for all of all the listeners as well. What's coming up for you? You have galleries in New York and LA and all these different places. Do you have a
Mm-hmm.
show coming? And if
I
so, we want to put that link on the show notes for folks to.
I I don't have my shows that are coming up will be this fall. Again, I kind of took a break from shows again this spring. There's so much I'm working on and trying to explore in my work that the sort of rushed deadlines of the shows kind of felt like a bit much. But I'm working on some new representation, which I'm excited about and will announce soon. And I have a gallery in New Orleans, a Gallery Orange, Joanne Artman Gallery. She's in Laguna Beach, and then also New York City, and then Gardner Colby Gallery, which is down in Naples, Florida. And they all have several paintings, but my next big show will be upcoming this fall. So I'm
Awesome.
excited. I'm excited for that, and we'll be working hard through the summer, I'm sure, to prepare.
Awesome. Well, listen again, thank you so much. And you guys, all the links are in the show notes. And thank you
Thank you for
so
having me.
much.
I'm
Yeah.
so thrilled. I was so flattered. I have followed you for a long time, and I just almost fell over when I got your message to do a podcast. So I'm just thrilled to chat with you, and excited to share all these things. So I really, really
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, your work just really struck me, and I know it will everyone else. And it wasn't a surprise that there was so much interest and interesting things to talk about around the work. And it's so cool how work can show somebody, right? Like it's a
Mm-hmm.
stand-in for you, but really it's you. And
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
love sometimes the way this goes, and a podcast in particular, that you see a thing and then you get to meet the person who made the thing, and it's like, oh yeah, of course, I know this person already. I'm
Right.
aligned. I'm there. Anyway, listen,
Right.
thank you so much. I really appreciate
Thank
it.
you. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
All
Bye.
right.